G'day ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Draw with Jazza. I'm Jazza, and today we're going to be doing a character design / costume design for two aliens. And I'm going to do a more human looking alien and then a much weirder looking alien. Now I thought this could be really fun to do because it's also following some parameters set up in a competition that I thought I'd bring to your attention, which is absolutely mind-blowingly cool. And with the amount of work that I see that blows me away every month in the challenge of the month, I thought if anyone would be interested and possibly totally win this competition, it would be the guys who watch my channel and participate in the challenge of the month. So this competition is run by Luc Besson, legendary screenwriter and director of movies like The Fifth Element and Lucy and loads of others, and he's coming up with a movie called Valerian and the City of a Thousand Planets. And this competition essentially requires designers and creative people to submit a costume design for an alien / humanoid / intergalactic whatever, and potentially win $1,000 and have their costume featured in the film in a scene of an intergalactic cocktail party. So if that doesn't sound epic to you, I don't know what does, but the link is in the description and check it out now. Definitely worth entering, and I think a lot of you would stand a great chance of making something very interesting that could catch his attention. So I thought it'd be fun today to follow the parameters of that competition, because even though the competition has a limited time of this month, essentially, it's a theme and an approach that I think will stand the test of time, and it's good fun to do. So we have parameters. We have the idea that we're creating an alien and a costume for that alien. So I'm actually going to act as if I'm creating an entry to that competition, and whether you enter it or not is up to you, but it's a fun project and I thought we could have a bit of fun with that today. And I'm going to create two alien characters, and you can see I have two very faint outlines of a male on the left and right. Now the male on the left I'm going to keep much more humanish, and the male on the right I'm going to warp quite a lot and make them much more strange and intergalactic looking. So starting off with our more mainstream alien, I suppose you could say, we're going to follow the basic parameters, but we need to make it a bit weird. Obviously, creating things like monsters and creatures, there are certain aesthetics that you go for, and then with aliens, there's a similar feeling we need to capture to communicate that they're an alien. And these might be things like warping the geometry slightly or adding features. And one of the more common things that you could do is warp the parameters or the geometry of the head. So I'm actually going to lengthen the chin, make a really narrow jaw and a really tall head like this. So already we're getting an interesting looking character, but the rest of the body is looking a bit out of place. So I'm going to start to just tweak and bring the neck in. So we have one of our stereotypical grey alien looking head and necks, but we don't want to keep it too stereotypical. We want to be interesting. So what can we do to make this slightly interesting? We have features of the face that we can add or not add, like the nose, eyes and mouth, and we can make them different. We want to use the uncanny valley. We want to make people uncomfortable because these are creatures that are totally never before seen and must obviously come from another planet because they haven't evolved on our planet. Now, one of the things you can actually do, aside from deciding what you place and how weird it does or doesn't look, is also warp where it's placed. So let's say we have these positions for the eyes, nose and mouth, which are pretty mainstream. We can warp these and bring the nose nice and high and make the eyes quite low and wide, and have the mouth really high as well and really wide. So already, just by sort of stretching things around like that, things are slightly interesting. We can do the same thing with the ear. Instead of having a normal ear, which would be what up here, I'm going to have one down here. And this is going to look a little different. And already we're getting that feeling that it looks much more alien. Now we can add in some more normal geometry to help aid the way this stuff fits in. So we might add some bumps for eyebrows and add some jaw lines and skeletal structures around the face just to make it feel a little more built rather than randomly put together. But this is the sort of process I like to follow when inventing creatures like aliens or monsters. We essentially can take what we already know and tweak and warp it until we have something new and interesting. So for example, one of the things that people expect with arms is that they're either big or small, but why don't we go halfway? Let's have the first half of the arm nice and narrow, following fairly human anatomy, and then the second half of the arm warping and twisting until it's a huge size, reaching the hands and with tiny little spread apart fingers like this. And we can follow that anatomical idea through the rest of the body, having the ribs showing and a really skinny torso. And we've set up a basic idea of what the rest of the character is going to follow. So the middle, more core aspects of the limbs and torso are going to be very skinny and malnutrition looking and almost wiry and twisted. And even the anatomy is very human. But by the time we reach the lower parts of the limbs, the muscles are going to untwist and blow up into very large clumps of something. And we don't even quite know what it is, but we can give him these really short spread apart toes like we have with his hands. And the anatomy for the legs and the arms is not human anatomy. And the end result is definitely something you could look at and say, well, that's an alien, especially if I hide my human sketch underneath. So that's a very rough idea as to how you can approach a very normal looking human structure and turn it into something a little more alien, a little more interesting. Now I want to talk about warping things beyond the point of recognition. Now I've picked a sketch of a male which is a little more robust, a little thicker around the edges, I suppose you could say, just to sort of have it a little bit different to the norm. And I'm going to take elements of this and just totally warp it. So what I mean by that is I could take the head and bring it down here and just erase some of this internal stuff. I could take the arm and manipulate it. And by the way, I'm manipulating by pressing Control T on Windows. I'm just going to turn it out like that. And I'm going to right click and change to warp. And this allows me to totally mess with the geometry like so. And manipulate that so then I have a second arm. So I'm going to do the same over here. Obviously the back arm is a little bit hidden. So I'm just going to get rid of that and redraw the back arm. So his arm's going to be quite large and a bit warped. So I'm just going to do this and just show these arms in context. So we can see things are obviously starting to get pretty weird, and that's exactly what we want. The next thing I'm going to do is completely erase the lower half of the body because I'm happy with the upper half, but not happy with the lower half. And I'm going to bring the body down, really make everything nice and large, wide and fat. And then I'm going to redraw in the lower half of the body, but this time a little differently. And I'm going to have some of these legs that sort of go out and back like this, sort of like centaur hooves. Now, just for fun, we'll give him a tail, and I'm going to stretch out the stomach area of this character and really make him nice and large. So now that I've got his weird body structure in a place that I'm pretty happy with, now we need to do our rough construction and turn him into something that would resemble an alien. And let's go a little bit different here because our alien on the left is much more normal and mainstream, and his structure is very soft and much more grey alien. Whereas on this one, let's go much sharper and harder and carapacey. And rather than going humanoid in their features, I'm actually gonna get some ideas from other creatures, things like pincers maybe, or horns and tails and spikes and whatever, and throw them all into this character and make him nice and interesting. So starting off with the face, for example, let's go with no traditional 2 eyes. Let's add 2 more eyes like this. So we're adding several areas of eyes to the face. So we have slits up here on the face for nose, and I'm going to have the head nice and sharp and back, and I'm going to have these spikes in the middle of the head going all the way back, and ears that are quite large like this. And I'm not going to have a mouth because I think having too many humanoid aspects like eyes, nose, mouth and ears like we have here, even though they're very weird and different, can be a little too normal. So I'm going to add pincers and just like a weird area that could be where a mouth goes, where he probably devours things, but I'm going to make it look much less mouth-like. And I'm just going to drag this down so he's actually got this head sort of without any neck at all. So following the same process with the rest of the body, we can start off with humanoid anatomy in some areas just so we have some level of familiarity, but then we can also start to add some weird stuff. So for example, we can have pretty normal arms, even though there are 4 of them, and just turn the hands into something different. And in this case, I think something like crab claws would work the best. So I'm trying to keep my overall anatomy somewhat familiar, but we're also trying to make it as interesting and unique as possible. So in doing so, we pick singular areas like the hands and the boobs and the head that can be really, really weird, but then other areas that are pretty familiar and normal, just so that there's something of a comparison that can be made to what we're already familiar with. But there's enough that's weird and different that it definitely looks like an alien. Okay, so I've finished my 2 alien designs, and these should be fun to create some costumes for. I'm going to hide my original sketches, which looked like that, which are a bit irrelevant now, and I have my alien characters. So now I'm going to design outfits to go on top. Now, I personally think that if you're going about doing something like this as a client brief or a competition entry, I would design the alien first, because obviously the outfit is going to be affected by what the alien's culture is, what their limbs and torso and all their proportions are like, and how they would all fit together. And then of course, aesthetically, how they would marry into each other. So for example, the character on the left, I would imagine would wear much more cloth, like outfits with, flowing bits here and there, whereas the character on the right, I can imagine some chunks of metal and some straps and shards and some occasional spikes even. Now, I like to draw in my sketch pencil here. This is my construction blue pencil. For those of you who don't know, I have a set of custom Photoshop brushes, and that's what I'm using for this. And if you're interested in getting those, you can check them out at jazzzastudios.com or at the link in the description. And I'm going to use a new layer with my blue, and I just want to change the color of my current sketch. So just add a color overlay and make it a light gray, like so. And this will mean that my blue sketch on top of that will show up a little easier. So now I'm going to zoom into my character on the left here and design an outfit that can go on top of him. So we're going to do the same thing with their outfits that we did with the characters themselves. Start off with a few things that we know work with what we're familiar, such as collars or sleeves, and then add some elements that are a little bit different. Have bits of clothing pop out or poke out, or have some interesting visual features that don't sit normally or that aren't exactly what we would wear as humans. And then we get a bit more of a foreign feeling and an alien look. Now, I've decided with this character that his large limbs are a bit too chunky, and maybe that's a problem that his race have with clothing, so that the clothing that he wears that's made of cloth can sit around his torso and the skinnier parts of his limbs, whereas his wrists and ankles, which are a lot clumpier and more awkward looking, can have funnier looking alien bits that have funny shapes and sit interestingly on the body, and add an element of interest in the design. Now, the other thing to remember is the demographic that they need to fit into. So even though these are interesting looking aliens and they could look quite primitive, we need to keep in mind that they're at an intergalactic cocktail party. So they're wearing their very best clothes, and these are the people that are the cream of the crop of their race. So they're obviously going to be much more affluent than many of the normal people from their planets. So I'm happy with the result of the character on the left. The general design has 2 elements that seem to be repeating themselves. So for example, in the head, torso, and even some of the limbs, there's this cloth with this draping down square end. That's a fairly reoccurring thing. And then we have elements like these bands wrapped around the wrists and the neck and the ankles. So these are 2 things that I've used as design features throughout the piece to create something that feels cohesive and sort of singular in its design. And that's a good approach you can have when creating weird looking designs, to also make it feel like it does fit in its own way. So now I'm going to do a costume design for my character on the right, and obviously if he were wearing the same costume as the character on the left, it might look a little bit weird. So we're going to want to work with an aesthetic that we've established. And I think with this character, it's going to work well in chunks, in different parts, as if he's wearing armor, but we also need to make sure that he does fit in a cocktail party element. So what I might do actually is work with the idea of carapace, and work with the idea of him having ornate carapace and then interweaving some occasional cloth or straps throughout the character. And I think the carapace would be relevant pretty much everywhere except for the center part of the belly, which for most creatures that have a carapace type thing, the belly is usually something that isn't covered in this hard shell armor. So something we can either create a different texture with or use the cloth and leather with. So the first thing I'll do is outline where the shells would go, where the chunks of carapace will sit and how they will form around the limbs and the body. Something helpful when doing this is to keep two things in mind. One is how armor would sit on the body, and the other is how the anatomy sits on the body. And then you can use these things and intertwine them and use them to sort of work into each other. Now that I've outlined where the carapace is, and that's going to be the core attribute of the visuals of this character's costume, I'm going to outline a couple of other design features that I'm going to use, and one of them is to have two rings centered on the torso, and I'm going to have leather straps connecting these two rings and then pulling them in directions of the limbs and shoulders. And we don't know what cultural significance this might have on his planet, but let's pretend it's some sort of military captain's armor that he's wearing. And perhaps the carapace is something that they actually put on rather than something that's grown on their anatomy. But of course, this is a cocktail party, so we're going to be wearing some finery. So let's add some nice drapery here covering his groin. I quite like the belly being exposed like this, and maybe that's a dominance thing on his planet, that he likes to sort of show his manly chest and belly off to other people. But because of course he's being refined at a cocktail party, let's cover up the rest of his limbs in cloth and have that cloth sort of show here under the arms, so you can see that he's actually wearing some clothes under his carapace as well. Now for his feet, obviously these claws are going to dig into the marble or scratch the ground of the palace that he's hosted at or whatnot. So to be respectful, he may have covered them up with something, and so let's put on some rubber stoppers that turn into sort of shoes. So he's wearing slippers essentially. And then we have our finished character design. So the one on the left looks much more like some sort of formal ambassador, and the one on the right might be some sort of military general, but obviously dressed up and trying to be respectful to those he is around. So these are the aliens I've created for my cocktail party. So now what I'm going to do is create a finished concept art piece for both of them. So now that I've got my rough character pieces for each of them here, I can merge them together, and I'm going to create a color overlay of black, so that you can see that they're all sort of unified like this now, but obviously there are some details that are showing in behind. And so what I'm actually going to do is go through both characters and do a bit of a cleanup. So I'm going to get rid of all the lines that don't need to show through. So for example, we don't need to see the nipples and geometry of the body through the cloth here. And I'm going to go through both characters, and after a bit of a cleanup and maybe adding some details, I'm going to add some rough color underneath and a couple of different shades, and then I'll have my finished concept pieces. Alright, so I've done a cleanup for both of these characters. I'm happy with how they're looking, and now they're ready for color. And once I've colored them, they will be finished concept pieces. So a concept piece doesn't necessarily have to be super refined and polished, but basically the idea of a concept art is communication. We need to communicate a solid aesthetic style, solid design aspects, and that's what I'm going for in these two characters. So before we jump into color, we want to figure out what colors we're using, and we can set up what's called a palette. And then from that palette, we can just sort of pick those colors as we need them and apply them where we want them. So for our character on the left here, I'm going to go with much cooler colors. And I think things like turquoise would be really nice throughout. So I'm just going to place that there next to him. I'm going to pick another color. Let's go with a much lighter mid blue. I'll put that here. This character's got a very regal feel to him, so I think maybe a touch of gold would be nice, especially because it contrasts nicely with these sky blues and turquoise colors, which turquoise is also a nice affluence feeling color as well. The character's skin could be interesting. I'm just going to go nice and plain, a really pasty sort of pale tone there. And I'll pick a couple of colors just so we have a couple of skin tone colors to pick from. And let's just add a few other colors for interest. I'm going to go a darker sort of orange that could complement the gold, and a darker sort of turquoise with a touch more blue and saturation over here. And I think that's the general color scheme that I'm going to work with, but if we just work with those, it might get a little stale, so it's also nice to add something a little different in the mix. I'm going to go for, let's say, a rich dark green. I'm just going to whack that in there. There we have a palette that I'm going to work with. I don't exactly know where they're going to go. I think we know our skin tone, and we're just going to sort of figure out where the highlights and the strong colors are going to sit as well. And now we're going to find a palette for our other hefty fellow here. And I'm going to go with much hotter colors because he seems like much more of a military general. So I'm going to go for a nice medium browny red. And we can select a few other tones that can complement and marry into that as we desire to use them. And we also need to work with some other elements, and we want to make him feel nice and regal as well, but gold is probably a bit too nice. But if we go for like a nice shiny gunmetal silver, we can put that throughout the piece as well, because then that also reinforces a bit of a militaristic feel, but also the fact that it's clean and nice and shiny. So I'm going to put in a few colors there for that. And I think it would be good to pick a few different skin tone colors. So let's go like a nice muddy, dark, desaturated green, maybe a touch of yellow in there as well. So that might be his skin tone. We should also add some lighter options in there as well, maybe add a touch more yellow. And if we throw something completely different in the mix, maybe let's go for like a medium purpley blue, and I'll just sort of paste that there. So now I have two color palettes for these characters. I'm ready to get painting. I'm just going to use my oils brush. This is again one of the brushes that I've created for my custom set. So otherwise I'm going to get started with the coloring. So there you go, ladies and gentlemen. These are my finished aliens and costumes. I hope this has been an enjoyable example for you as to how you might go about designing an alien or an interesting monster type character, and of course how you can design a costume around that. There's another video I've created on how to design a costume or clothing, so make sure to click the link on the screen or in the description to check that out. And it's, again, how to design costumes, which might be quite helpful in that competition which I mentioned at the start. Once again, if you're interested in that competition and a chance to nab $1,000 and to have your design featured in a movie by Luc Besson, make sure to check it out on the link on the screen in the description at Talent House to get your entry in and submit your design of your alien and costume to that competition. Otherwise, that's it for now, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and until next time, I'll see you later. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe to my channel to see new content every week. Check out more of my stuff by clicking the annotations over there. If you want to support my work and get a few goodies for yourself, head over to my store for archives, ebooks, and get yourself something nice. If you're looking for a great place to collaborate, explore, or share your own content, head over to newgrounds.com. That's it for now, and until next time, see you later.